Laura Bennett woke before dawn. The lab lights hummed in the quiet room. Outside, the city still slept. Inside, the arrays on the observation deck glowed like small stars. She moved slowly, touching the edge of the console to feel for the right controls. Her hands were steady. Her mind was wide awake. She had listened to the sky for many years. The sky had become a map of small noises, a language written in narrow bands of light and radio. Laura listened for patterns. She had learned to tell a friendly beep from a worry. Most nights, the sky gave nothing worth writing down. That morning, the sky gave a voice that did not fit anything she knew. The signal arrived as a long, low call. It was shaped almost like a sentence. It had parts that rose and parts that fell. It repeated with small changes. Laura watched the screen and felt a chill. The pattern was not random. Someone had made it on purpose. She started the usual checks. She ran the arrays through filters, cleaned the noise, and matched what she saw against the public logs. Nothing matched. She called up the deep library of signals. She ran the new call through the old archives. The call touched on shapes she knew from ancient records. It had a marker she had read about only in dusty files, an old format used in the first age of the Council. That format had been meant for a species called the Peace Weavers, a gentle race said to answer calls for help. Laura's chest tightened. Warnings sprang in her mind. The Peace Weavers were a myth, a story used to calm frightened worlds. The Council had said they were gone, but the signal was real and it used the old format. She sent a quiet message to the military liaison. I have an anomalous call, archive matched to Peace Weaver format, repeatable, need assessment. Her fingers found the code sequence and pressed send. The message moved fast through secure lines. Daniel Brooks read the note with a dry mouth. He was the kind of man who kept files in order. He read numbers and maps and made lists. He had seen odd things, but this note made a different sound inside his head. He stood up from his desk and walked to the window. Dawn light spilled in. He did not look at the city. He looked at the sky and tried to imagine what a help call would sound like from a place that remembered how to call for the Peace Weavers. He ordered a small team. Bring me Laura's data. Run it through the field nets. No alarms yet. Keep it quiet. He felt the pull of both curiosity and fear. A call like that was a risk. If the sky called a legend, then pride and dread would meet in the same human chest. Within hours, more people came to the observatory. Engineers, sailors, and the admiral's clerk filled the space between the consoles. The hum of voices rose and fell like tides. Every person looked at the arrays and spoke in short, careful phrases. Laura explained what she had found. She showed the shape, the rise, the fall. She held the hands of the team, letting them see what she had seen. Admiral Julia Carter arrived in an even gray suit. Her boots made no sound on the metal walkways. Julia had led ships in storms and kept men alive in places where others would panic. She looked at the pattern and did not smile. If it is a help signal, she said, we should answer. If it is a trap, we should not. Her voice was blunt and direct. They could not do nothing. The Council had laws about distress calls. A call in the Peace Weaver format was a special case. It had treaty power. The question was who would reply. The Council's rules said the nearest compatible ally should respond. But the nearest in this case might be too far. The message had jumped many sectors. The log said it came from the Saria cluster, a place of thin maps and old wars. Laura traced the path on a holomap. Her finger moved slowly over the pale lines. The Saria cluster sat at the edge of an old exclusion zone. The exclusion zone had a name few used now. It was the Deathworld envelope, a loose set of systems that had become too dangerous to pass. Ships that entered it rarely left unchanged. The name hung in the air like a bad taste. Humans had been told stories about Deathworlds in school. They spoke of worlds where the sky burned in strange colors, where life grew into weapons, and where survival came at the price of hard, cold hearts. Those stories were told to make children brave. Many believed them and then forgot them. Some said the Council had once kept humanity away from the wider worlds because humans learned to survive where others could not. Daniel watched faces. He saw fear and stubbornness and a spark that made him feel both proud and afraid. We will do a short recon, he said. A quiet ship, minimal signature, no heavy weapons at first. Learn who sent this call and why. If it is a trap, we leave. If it is real, we see what help we can give." He sounded calm. Inside, his chest beat with the rapid, warm rhythm of a man who knew risk and wanted the truth. They chose a small corvette, the kind of ship built for speed and sensors. It had simple armor and a crew trained to move light and fast. Admiral Carter named the captain, a young woman called Ann Miller. Ann had been at sea since she was old enough to read star charts. She was careful and quick, a good mix for the first step into a problem no one could fully read. Laura and Daniel argued about whether to go. The rules said scientists could not go on a military recon without clearance. They made a compromise. Laura would go as a civilian observer. Daniel would go as liaison. They would not command. They would bring data and the will to report back. Before they left, Julia pulled them aside. Her face had a softness that did not suit her rank. "You two listen to your crew. Trust the ones who stand in the dark and fix the engines. The first thing a new world teaches is not found in books. It is felt under the boots." She held Laura's shoulder for a moment and then let go. Her touch was not gentle, but it carried something like a saying passed down. The corvette slipped from dock like a fish leaving a pond. The launch was quiet. The city watched the ship on screens and thought mostly of daily things. Only a few in the crowd felt the small tremor in their chests that came from a job leaving home into the unknown. Space moved with slow and indifferent grace. The corvette crossed empty lanes, past markers that had names and old horrors. The crew spoke in small groups and kept their faces calm. Anne walked the narrow hallways and checked the panels with a steady hand. She met Laura in the small galley and smiled with a tired crease. "You ever get used to the quiet before a jump?" Laura laughed softly. "No. I think that is the wrong word. I don't like it, but I respect it." They both sat and drank tea in paper cups. On the way, Laura watched the signal again. It felt different now, closer and yet distant. The pattern had not changed. It still carried that low call, the kind of sound that told stories of last stands and desperate hope. The crew listened at the edge of technical talk. Some of them spoke of family stories about the peace weavers. Most kept silence. They made a stop at a relay outpost to refuel and to patch their route. The outpost was old, a small ring of metal with tired antennas. A single man huddled in the control room. His name was Victor Hale, and he had a long face with deep lines that told of many nights without sleep. He watched the corvettes approach and then came out to meet them. Victor had a map of the Saria cluster. He pointed to a line of dim dots on the screen. "You don't want to go where those dots lead without the right papers," he said. "Few ships make it back whole. The Varan used to claim that space. Even now, the ghosts of those campaigns live in the wrecks. If you go, you should know the ground." He spoke slowly. His words were medicine and warning. Anne listened. She folded her hands. "We go to a call for help. We keep our minds open. We keep our scanners strict. We do not take unnecessary risks." Her voice had the weight of command and the thin lightness of someone who must both care and make hard choices. They left the outpost and dove deeper. The maps grew faint. The stars seemed less ordered. The paths between points lost their smooth curves and became raw lines. The corvette's hull felt more alive, as if the ship itself knew this space had seen more pain than most. The crew tightened routines. They spoke less and listened more. When they entered the system where the call came from, the sight stole breath. The first world they passed was scarred. It had bands of ash across its dark oceans. The clouds burned in green veils. The moons were pocked and jagged. From orbit, the planet looked like a fist with broken nails. Laura felt a cold ring in her chest. She had seen hard worlds in simulations, but this was not a simulation. The scenes bled into her in a way she had no book for. She watched the colors and felt a new term grow in her mind. The rawness of a world that had been tested and had responded by making itself meaner. They found signs of war. Broken stations drifted in shallow orbits like dead fish. Some structures burned in slow flames. The corvette's sensors picked up fields of strange energy, the kind that made life hard for machines. The crew adjusted shields and moved with a sharp, efficient rhythm. They were not green. They had seen worse, but they had not seen this. On the surface, they found wreckage and burned villages. A field of collapsed towers lay like a broken crown. Bodies had been moved, not to neat graves but to heaps that spoke of emergency. The people they found were ragged and quiet. They had skin like paper and eyes that watched like children who had seen too many storms. A small group came forward. They wore simple clothes and held tools that looked like they belonged to both farmers and builders. Their leader was a tall man with an old scar above his cheek. He spoke in a language that did not match the call's format but made sense when the crew played it back through translators. His voice had the rough edges of someone who spoke through lost sleep. Laura stepped forward and lowered her hands. She had learned to smile softly in the right moments. She spoke in the common tongue and used the simple, clear phrases she had practiced. "We heard your call. We are here to help. We are not here to fight if there is a way to avoid it." Her words were small against the roar of a ruined world, but they held a line of calm. The tall man looked at her and then at Anne. He nodded once slowly. "You are human," he said in the common tongue. "We expected the peace weavers. We did not know humans answered." His voice had surprise, relief, and a tired caution. The crew set up a small camp. They shared food in the open, and the locals watched. Daniel and Laura walked among the ruined homes and took notes. They recorded stories of a sudden assault and a machine that ate fields and ships. The elders spoke in low tones of a shadow that swallowed light. The young near the camp were quiet and watched the human faces as if learning what human eyes held. That night, Laura lay in a small tent and stared at the canvas above. She could hear the talk of the camp, the soft scraping of tools, the distance of stars like pinpricks that would not go away. She thought of the call and how a message meant for a lost, gentle race had reached a people who lived by harder rules. The two kinds of help were not the same. She wondered what the price of this help might be. She turned the question in her mind like a small stone. The Corvette's lamps made shadows that looked like low hills. She felt the memory of Admiral Carter's words in her bones. The ground teaches first, books later. She understood now that survival had its lessons, and that some races learned those lessons by making choices the galaxy would call harsh. In the next hours, a low roar rose from the horizon. Machines moved with a cold, deliberate hunger. The Varan forces did not hide. They showed themselves as a line of metal teeth. The human crew found themselves in a violent theater with little time to rehearse. Anne called the bridge. She moved with the quick hands of someone who had seen war in neat drills and unclean places alike. Her crew set sensors and took positions. Daniel and Laura watched as Marines checked gear and the engineers ran fast repairs. In that movement, Laura saw a truth she could not find in old books. Humans did not wait for perfect plans. They moved with will. The first clash was loud and short. The Varan machines struck like beasts. They sent waves of heat and a sound like the cry of a bending sky. The Corvette's small guns spoke once and opened a path. Human Marines leaped and took ground. The local people watched with eyes that asked whether this help was what they had wanted. When the smoke cleared, the human team had pushed back the immediate threat. The Varan machines withdrew like dark tide lines leaving torn sand. The humans did not celebrate. They checked for wounds and fixed what broke. They talked quietly with the locals and learned more of the disaster. They found that the call had been sent in the hope that a legend would come to mend a broken defense. Instead, a new kind of force had answered, a force that a galaxy had once feared as Deathworlders. That night, near the low fires, old men told stories of the peace weavers. They said those beings asked for peace and offered mercy. The locals had not expected anything so soft. Instead, they saw a people who would stand in a broken field and fight until the machines could not move. They saw humans as a tool that could be used to stop the immediate pain. Laura listened and felt the world shift under her feet. She felt the weight of a choice stretching ahead. The humans had crossed a line by answering a call that was not meant for them. The galaxy would notice. The question was not what they had done. The question was what the galaxy would do now that the Deathworlders had returned to a sky that had once hidden them. The morning after the first clash felt heavy and quiet. Smoke still drifted from the dark hills where the Varan machines had pulled back. Laura Bennett stepped out of her tent and felt the cold air press against her face. The local sky was pale blue with faint streaks of orange. It looked almost peaceful, but peace here was only a thin blanket spread over fear. The villagers moved slowly, carrying tools. checking their damaged homes, and studying the humans with a mixture of trust and uncertainty. They knew the humans had saved them yesterday. They also knew that saving them once did not mean the danger was gone. Daniel Brooks stood near the edge of the camp, looking toward the distant horizon where the Varan forces had disappeared. His eyes were sharp and thoughtful. He had spent most of the night reviewing recordings of the Varan machines. He had analyzed their armor, movement, and strange energy signatures. The machines reminded him of old Deathworld stories, the kind of stories that spoke of creatures that learned from every wound. He hoped these machines did not learn in the same way. Ann Miller walked toward Daniel with a small pad in her hands. She looked calm, but her voice was firm. She explained that after the short battle, her crew had detected deeper signals farther inside the ruined system. These signals were steady, strong, and spread across several sectors like pulses. They were not random. They felt like the heartbeat of a military machine. Daniel listened without interrupting. He knew what she was trying to say. The Varan Dominion was not testing the humans. They were preparing for something larger. He looked at the villagers and felt a quiet worry in his chest. If the humans had answered a call meant for the Peace Weavers, then the Varan might see that as a threat. They might assume the humans stood with the coalition, and if the Varan believed that, they would come back with far more force. Laura joined them, holding a small scanner. Her hair was tied back and she looked tired but focused. She said she had found a strange detail while re-examining the original distress call. The signal seemed older than she first thought. It carried distortions that were not caused by distance alone. It looked like the message had been repeated many times across old relay chains that were almost broken. Some parts of the message seemed to have been copied by machines too damaged to maintain accuracy. Yet the key pattern, the Peace Weaver format, remained intact. Daniel asked what that meant. Laura explained that the coalition might have sent the signal long before the humans received it. Some systems might have ignored it. Some systems might have been destroyed before they could pass it forward. The message reaching Earth might not have been luck. It might have been a sign that most other powers refused to answer. Anne did not like the sound of that. She reminded them that if other civilizations avoided the call, then the humans might be walking into a conflict that was already lost. She asked whether they should return home and bring a larger fleet. She spoke carefully, not out of fear, but out of concern for her crew. Before Daniel could reply, the tall local man who had greeted them the day before approached. His name was Ralim, and he carried the weight of a leader whose people had suffered too long. His eyes were quiet but bright with determination. He told them that scouts had seen smoke rising from the old mining valley to the north. The valley had once been their main source of food supplies and building materials. If the Varan controlled it, the villagers would lose their last hope of rebuilding. Daniel and Anne exchanged a long look. They knew they had not come here to fight a full war. They had come to investigate a distress call. But they also knew that leaving these people helpless was not something any human with a steady heart could do. They asked Ralim to describe the valley, the path, and the enemy positions he had seen. Ralim knelt and drew a simple map in the dirt. The valley was shaped like a bowl with narrow entry points. It had an old processing station where the villagers once stored food and tools. Now, strange machines moved near the entrance and strange lights blinked inside the station. No one had dared to go closer. Anne ordered her Marine team to prepare for movement. Daniel and Laura joined the group. The Marines moved with practiced ease. They checked weapons, tested armor plates, and secured communication devices. They did not speak loudly. They saved their energy for the work ahead. Laura watched them and felt a quiet respect. Humans did not train for glory. They trained for survival. As they left the camp, several villagers followed them quietly, carrying long poles with small scanners attached. They wanted to help. They wanted to reclaim their land. And let them come, but warned them to stay behind the Marines. The villagers nodded. They knew the risks better than anyone. The walk to the valley was long and tense. The path crossed narrow ridges and dry riverbeds. In the distance, burned forests looked like fields of black spears. The air carried the faint smell of metal and smoke. The Marines moved in a patient line, pausing often to listen. Daniel scanned the horizon with binoculars, marking shapes and shadows. When they reached the top of a cliff overlooking the valley, everyone stopped. Below them, the valley was filled with strange shapes. Dozens of Varan machines stood in neat rows, all pointed toward the processing station. They were shaped like tall insects with long limbs and bodies covered in plates that looked grown rather than built. Their eyes glowed a dull red. They were not moving, but they pulsed with a faint energy that made the ground tremble. Inside the station, a soft blue light flickered. It looked unnatural and cold. Laura scanned it and frowned. She told Daniel that the frequency matched part of the distortion inside the distress signal. It felt too similar to be a coincidence. She suggested that the Varan might have intercepted the original message and used it to track down and destroy the Coalition's outposts. Daniel felt a sharp twist in his stomach. If that was true, then answering the call had placed humans between enemies who already understood each other's weaknesses. Anne whispered orders, and the Marines set up along the ridge. They needed a plan. The machines were too many to fight directly. They needed to create confusion and force the machines to separate. One of the villagers suggested using old mining tunnels that ran under the valley. Those tunnels led straight to the processing station. Daniel's eyes lit up. It was risky, dark, and unstable, but it was a chance. They split into two teams. Anne led the ridge team. Daniel, Laura, and a few Marines followed Ralem and two other villagers into the narrow tunnel entrance hidden between rocks. The air inside was thick with dust. The beams of their handheld lights danced across broken supports. The tunnel had not been used for years. Some parts looked ready to collapse. They moved slowly, listening to distant grinding noises above them. The machines in the valley made pulses that vibrated through the stone. Laura felt the ground shift under her boots and forced herself to breathe slowly. Daniel walked ahead with his scanner raised. He whispered updates to Anne through the small earpiece. She whispered back with the calm confidence of a captain who could make decisions even with half the world falling apart around her. When they reached the exit point, Ralem pushed aside a rusted gate. Beyond it lay the underside of the processing station. They could hear the hum of the blue light above. The air felt colder, like standing next to something alive but unkind. The Marines spread out. One of them climbed a broken ladder to the main level and peeked through a crack. He signaled that the nearest Varan machine was facing away. That was their moment. Daniel climbed up next. The room was filled with broken consoles and old tools. In the center sat a large device pulsing with blue light, shaped like a sphere wrapped in wires and bone like supports. Laura reached it and immediately recognized its pattern. She whispered that this was not a Varan machine. It was a Coalition beacon, torn apart and rebuilt into something else. The Varan had twisted it to broadcast a false pattern or to track any species that dared to respond. Suddenly, a sharp noise cut through the station. One of the machines outside had detected movement. Anne's team opened fire from the ridge, drawing attention. Red beams and bright flashes filled the valley. The machines turned toward the ridge, moving like metal predators awakened from sleep. Inside the station, Daniel told Laura to disable the beacon. She hesitated. If she cut the wrong line, the device might explode. But if she did nothing, the Varan would use it again. She closed her eyes for one breath, then began working. Her fingers moved quickly but carefully, searching for the power routes. The Marines covered the entrances, firing short bursts at any machine that came close. Outside, Anne's team fought a desperate battle. The ridge gave them height, but the machines were climbing. Their legs pierced the rock. The ground shook with each leap. Anne barked orders and kept her people moving. She shot with steady hands, each shot precise. Inside the station, the beacon suddenly flared bright. Laura felt a jolt of fear. Daniel grabbed her shoulder and pulled her back. The device screamed with a high, painful sound, and then the blue light cracked like shattered ice. A wave of energy burst outward, silent but powerful. Daniel pushed Laura to the ground as dust fell from the ceiling. When the wave faded, the beacon went dark. Outside, the machines paused. Their red eyes dimmed. Their bodies shivered as if struck by confusion. Some collapsed, twitching like insects whose legs no longer listened. Others staggered, searching for commands that no longer reached them. Anne saw her chance. She called for a full push. Her Marines charged along the ridge, dropping down into the valley. The villagers followed with long poles used to disrupt weak machines. For a moment it looked like the humans and villagers might win, but far in the distance another pulse shook the ground. A deeper, stronger signal. The Marines stopped. Daniel lifted his scanner. It showed something large moving toward the valley, larger than the machines they had fought, larger than the processing station. Laura looked toward the southern horizon and felt the same chill she had felt when she first saw the distress call. Varan Dominion had not sent only scouts to this world. They had sent a war platform, a machine built not to test or to frighten but to erase. Anne ordered everyone to fall back. Daniel and Laura ran toward the ridge. The villagers followed, dragging wounded people through dust and broken wires. Behind them the valley rumbled with the sound of metal approaching. By the time they reached the top of the ridge, the sun had dipped low. Shadows stretched long and thin across the land. The humans gathered their wounded. Laura patched injuries with shaking hands. Daniel organized a retreat path. Anne stood still for a long moment, watching the valley as the dark shape grew larger. She understood now that this was no small conflict. This was a war the coalition could not win alone, and humanity had stepped into it by answering a call that was never meant for them. The villagers watched the horizon with fear. The humans watched with determination. They all understood that the next hours would change everything. Laura looked at Daniel and whispered that the galaxy would soon learn that the Deathworlders had returned to the field of war. Daniel nodded, his jaw set. Humanity had answered, and the Varan Dominion would answer back. The night came fast after the retreat from the valley. The air grew colder and the sky darkened into deep blue. The stars above were sharp and bright, but the land below felt heavy with fear. The humans and villagers gathered near the remains of the camp. Many were injured. Some sat with blank eyes, too tired to speak. The younger villagers tried to help by carrying water and cloth, but even their small hands shook. Laura Bennett worked beside the medics, cleaning wounds and bandaging cuts. She tried to keep her voice calm when she spoke to the injured. She told them they were safe for now, though she was not sure if that was true. Each time she lifted her head, she saw the fear in their eyes. That fear made her want to work faster. Daniel Brooks stood near the fire, holding a small tablet with a dim map on display. He traced the lines with his thumb. The new reading from the scanner showed the path of the Varan war platform. It moved slowly but with purpose. It was not wandering. It was heading straight for the village. Ann Miller joined him. Her face was tired, but her eyes were clear. She asked how much time they had. Daniel estimated they had perhaps 2 or 3 hours before the machine reached the ridge. The villagers were not ready for another attack, and the humans did not have enough firepower to stop something that large. Anne took a deep breath and looked around at her crew. They were regrouping, checking weapons, and securing gear. They were brave, but even they looked shaken after seeing the size of the war platform. She told Daniel they needed either a way to slow the machine or a way to escape with the villagers. Daniel nodded. He knew escape might not be possible. The villagers had no vehicles. Many were injured. The land was rough. The war platform could catch them before they reached safer ground. But staying put meant certain destruction. Rallam, the village leader, approached them quietly. His stride was slow, but his posture remained steady. He listened as Daniel explained the situation. Rallam looked toward the dark horizon and then at his people. He said they could not run. They would not make it. Their only option was to hold the village long enough for the humans to call for help. Daniel hesitated. His Corvette had limited communication strength. Long-range signals could take time to reach Earth. Time was something they did not have. Anne asked how long it would take to send a full distress call. Daniel explained it would take 40 minutes to prepare and transmit. They would need to hold out for at least an hour. Anne looked around again. She saw the damaged buildings, the scorched ground, and the exhausted faces of the villagers. She knew holding off a war platform for an hour might be impossible, but she also knew humans had a strange habit of doing things others called impossible. Laura walked over, wiping dust from her hands. She listened to their plan. She said she had analyzed the broken beacon earlier. The Varan war platform seemed to be following signals from captured coalition devices. If they could create a false signal or overload the one that remained, they might confuse the machine, slowing it or forcing it to stop. Daniel asked if she could do it. Laura shook her head. Not alone. She would need equipment from the Corvette. She would need to build a new emitter and power it with the ship's auxiliary core. The problem was distance. The Corvette was outside the valley, anchored in a safer zone. Reaching it would take time they did not have. Anne called 2 Marines and ordered them to escort Laura to the ship. Laura refused to leave unless Daniel went with her. She needed someone who understood the Varan readings as well as she did. Daniel agreed, though he knew the journey would be dangerous. Anne gave them a strict timeline. They had 1 hour before the war platform reached the ridge. They had to move fast and return even faster. Daniel nodded, and Laura followed close behind him as they left the camp with their escorts. Back at the camp, Anne prepared for the defense. She ordered her crew to dig shallow trenches and set up simple barriers using pieces of broken buildings. The villagers joined in, carrying stones and tools, working as quickly as their tired bodies allowed. The children were moved to the far side of the camp where the land dipped and gave them some cover. Mothers sat with them, whispering soft promises that tomorrow would be better. Anne walked through the defenses, checking each position. She could hear the faint tremor of the war platform in the distance. It felt like a heartbeat under the ground, slow but monster-like. She told her Marines to stay calm. She reminded them they had faced things like this before, though she knew they had never faced anything quite this big. Far away, Daniel and Laura moved quickly across the ridge. The wind blew cold across the open land. Their flashlights cut through the darkness in thin white beams. The Marines kept watch, scanning the shadows. The war platform was behind them, but the land held other dangers. Smaller Varan machines sometimes moved in packs ahead of the main platform. Daniel prayed they would not cross paths with any. Laura felt the ground vibrate more clearly as they walked. Each tremor spread through her legs like a warning. She asked Daniel if he thought this world had any hope left. Daniel said hope was not something measured by safety. It was measured by effort. If they kept trying, then hope still existed. They reached the Corvette after 20 tense minutes. The ship sat like a dark silver blade in the dirt. Its lights were dim, and its engines hummed softly. Laura rushed inside and went straight to the engineering bay. She explained her plan to the ship's engineer, a quiet man named Aaron who rarely spoke unless needed. Aaron nodded, rolled up his sleeves, and helped her gather the components. Daniel monitored the scanner while they worked. The war platform was now closer to the village. The distance markers fell faster than he liked. He could almost feel the machine's movements in the air. Laura built the emitter carefully. It was a small device, no larger than her arm, but the power it needed was dangerous. She wired it into an auxiliary core, and Aaron calibrated the output. One mistake could burn out the device or even the entire system. She did not have time to test it. Daniel asked if it was ready. Laura took a slow breath and nodded. He helped her carry it out of the ship. They began the long run back toward the village. Meanwhile, at the camp, the war platform appeared as a dark shape on the horizon. The villagers gasped. Some stepped back in fear. Anne raised her voice and told them to hold their positions. The Marines lifted their weapons, aiming at the enormous machine. Its body looked like a giant beast made of steel and bone. It walked on 4 heavy limbs, each step sinking deep into the ground. Lights glowed under its plates like cold fire. When it was close enough, it released a low, deep sound that shook the air. It was not a roar. It was a signal, a command. Smaller machines crawled out from under its body, moving like insects ready to swarm. Anne ordered her Marines to fire. The first shots lit the dark sky with bright lines. The beams struck the smaller machines, ripping some apart. But the war platform barely noticed. It continued forward with slow certainty, like something that understood it could not be stopped. Back on the ridge, Daniel and Laura saw the flashes of the battle. They ran faster. Laura felt pain in her legs but refused to slow down. Daniel encouraged her, even though he was breathing hard himself. When they reached the camp, Laura dropped to her knees and began setting up the emitter. Daniel connected the power cables. Anne joined them, shouting updates over the noise of explosions. The smaller machines were getting closer. Some had climbed the ridge. The Marines fought them in tight skirmishes, using knives when guns grew too hot. Rallam stood with his people, holding a long staff ready to strike any machine that broke through. Villagers fought with tools, stones, anything they could find. Laura activated the emitter. At first, nothing happened. Then a soft hum grew into a strong, shaking pulse. The ground trembled under their feet. Daniel adjusted the frequency until the pulse matched the old beacon's pattern. The war platform hesitated, its massive legs slowed, its lights flickered. Anne shouted for everyone to hold their positions. The war platform stepped backward, then forward again. Then it stopped completely. The smaller machines froze in place. Their eyes dimmed. Laura pushed the emitter harder. Sparks flew from the cables. The device shook. The ground rumbled as if the world itself was reacting. The war platform let out a deep metallic groan. Its limbs bent, plates on its side cracked. The machine collapsed to one side, shaking the valley with a massive crash. The smaller machines fell like scattered puppets. Silence followed. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the villagers cried out with relief. The Marines lowered their weapons and checked on one another. Rallam placed a hand on Anne's shoulder, thanking her without words. Daniel helped Laura stand. She was shaking, but she smiled. She said they had done it. They had stopped it, but Daniel looked toward the horizon. He knew war platforms rarely traveled alone. If one had come, others might follow. And now the Varan Dominion knew that humans had entered the conflict. He whispered that the galaxy would not stay calm after tonight. Laura nodded. Humanity had shown itself again. And everywhere in the stars, someone would tremble at the news that the Deathworlders had returned. The morning after the fall of the war platform was strangely quiet. The villagers woke slowly, as if they were afraid the silence might break. The sun rose above the broken hills with pale light that touched the damaged buildings and the metal parts scattered across the ground. The air smelled of smoke and dust, but it also carried a small sense of hope. Laura Bennett walked through the camp with tired steps. She felt every muscle in her body ache, but she did not complain. She checked the emitter she had used to stop the war platform. The device was burnt and cracked, no longer useful, but it had done its job. It had bought them time the night before. It had saved lives. Daniel Brooks stood beside her, studying the horizon. He held a scanner and watched the readings with a serious expression. Laura asked if the Varan machines were returning. Daniel said he did not know yet. The war platform was no longer active, but the Varan Dominion rarely ended a fight after one loss. He expected a response soon. Anne Miller approached them, carrying her helmet under one arm. Her uniform was torn and stained, but she moved with purpose. She told them that she had contacted Admiral Carter during the night. It took time for the message to travel, but the Admiral had received it. Earth now knew that the humans had answered a distress call meant for another species. Earth also knew that the Varan Dominion had struck back. Daniel asked what the Admiral said. Anne replied that the Admiral had sent only one short message: "Hold your ground, reinforcements in transit." Laura felt relief, but also fear. Reinforcements meant that the situation was much larger than their small camp. It meant Earth understood the danger, and Earth never sent forces unless the threat was serious. The villagers gathered around the humans. Rallam stepped forward and asked what the future held for his people. Daniel explained that reinforcements were coming, but the Varan might return before the human fleet arrived. The villagers would need to prepare for another attack. Rallam nodded. He did not look surprised. He had lived through too many losses to believe one victory would end the struggle. He told his people to gather tools, repair shelters, and bring water to the wounded. The villagers moved quickly. They were tired, but they understood the weight of the moment. Hours passed. The sky grew warmer. The humans repaired their weapons and scanned the land again and again. The Marines sharpened their blades, cleaned the rifles, and checked the perimeter. They spoke very little. Each person thought about the war platform and how close death had come. Shortly after noon, Daniel's scanner beeped with a sharp tone. He looked down at it and felt his stomach tighten. Laura asked what he saw. Daniel said there were new signals, many of them moving in formation from 3 different directions. Anne joined them and read the data on the screen. Her face hardened. The Varan were sending more machines, but this time they were not sending one giant platform. They were sending a coordinated force, likely hundreds of machines, both large and small. It was not a scout force. It was an execution force. Laura looked toward the villagers. Some were carrying children. Some were building new walls out of broken stone. Many had hope shining in their eyes. She felt a sharp pain in her chest. They had fought so hard the night before, and now another storm was coming. Anne called her crew together. She explained the situation. She told them they might need to hold this ground longer than expected. Some Marines nodded calmly. Others set their jaws tight. No one argued. They all understood what was at stake. Daniel asked Anne what their best strategy was. Anne said they could not face the Varan army in open ground. They would need to choose a position with narrow access where the machines could not surround them. Rallam suggested the cliffs behind the village. The cliffs formed a natural wall. Only a few paths led up to them. If the humans and villagers stood there, they might prevent the machines from breaking through. Anne agreed. She ordered everyone to move toward the cliffs. The villagers gathered supplies and carried the wounded carefully. The Marines helped where they could, lifting heavy beams and strengthening weak walkers. Laura supported an elderly man who could barely walk. Daniel helped children climb the ridge. The cliffs were tall and uneven, but they offered good defense. Once everyone reached the top, the humans began setting up firing positions. The villagers placed stones to form simple barriers. Even the children helped, carrying small rocks and placing them in neat rows. Rallam moved from group to group, giving instructions and speaking to people softly. Daniel watched the villagers and felt a deep respect. They were afraid, but they did not run. They stood with the humans because they believed in the help they had been given. He hoped that belief would not cost them their lives. Late in the afternoon, the first sign of the Varan force appeared. A dark line stretched across the horizon like a moving shadow. Machines climbed over rocks and broken trees. Some walked on long legs. Some rolled on wheels. Some crawled with sharp limbs. Their bodies glowed with cold light. Their voices were silent, but their presence filled the land with dread. Anne gave the order to prepare. The Marines raised their weapons. The villagers held poles, stones, and tools. Laura stayed behind the front line, ready to treat the wounded. Daniel stayed with her to coordinate. As the Varan machines approached the base of the cliffs, they paused. They scanned the ridge with red eyes. Then they advanced. The battle began with a loud burst of sound. The Marines fired first, striking the front machines and knocking several down. The villagers threw stones and pushed sharpened poles between the rocks. The machines climbed, but the narrow path slowed them. Anne shouted commands, her voice clear and sharp. She moved like she had been born on a battlefield. The machines struck back. Their claws tore at the stone. Their beams cut through the air. The Marines dodged and fired back. Villagers pulled wounded fighters to safety. Laura ran between positions, treating burns, cuts, and broken limbs with quick hands. Daniel helped her lift injured soldiers and create a small protected area behind a boulder. For a while, the humans and villagers held the ridge. The Varan machines struggled to climb the narrow paths. Those that reached the top were taken down quickly by Marines with knives and short-range bursts. Stones rolled down the slopes, knocking machines off balance. But the Varan force did not stop. New machines climbed from the sides. Larger ones approached from the rear, firing long-range beams at the ridge. The humans took cover, but some were hit. Laura cried out when a young Marine fell beside her with a deep burn on his chest. She pressed cloth on the wound and whispered, "Stay with me," even though she knew he might not hear her. Daniel stayed by her side, firing whenever a machine got too close. His arms grew tired, but he did not stop. He saw villagers fall. He saw Marines struggle. He saw the ridge shaking under the weight of the assault. Anne realized they were close to being overwhelmed. She called Daniel over the comm and said they needed to buy time until reinforcements arrived. Daniel checked the clock. Reinforcements were close, maybe minutes away, but the ridge might not hold that long. Just then, a deep rumble shook the sky. Everyone looked up. A massive shadow passed overhead. Then another, and another. Human warships broke through the clouds like steel giants. Their engines roared across the land. Their weapons glowed bright as day. The villagers stared at the sky with wide eyes. Some dropped to their knees in relief. Anne shouted for everyone to hold their positions. The warships fired. Beams of light struck the Varan machines, tearing through them like paper. Explosions lit the valley. The machines tried to retreat, but there was no escape. The human ships followed them with precise strikes. The ground shook under the force. Within minutes, the valley was filled with smoke and broken metal. The survivors of the Varan force scattered into the distance, leaving the land quiet once again. Human troop carriers landed near the ridge. Soldiers in stronger armor stepped out. Medical teams rushed to Laura and Daniel, helping treat the wounded. Admiral Julia Carter stepped onto the ridge with a steady stride. She looked at Anne, Daniel, and Laura with a mix of pride and concern. She asked them for a full report. Anne summarized the battle and the actions taken by the humans and villagers. Julia listened silently and then nodded slowly. She said that the galaxy had already learned that humans had answered a call. News had spread fast. Some worlds were afraid, some were hopeful, but all were watching. She said that the Varan Dominion would not stop with one lost battle. The war had only begun. Humanity would need to choose its path carefully. The coalition might need Earth's strength. And Earth might need allies like these villagers who had stood bravely against impossible odds. Laura looked at the villagers, who were gathering around their wounded but smiling with relief. Daniel watched as children wrapped their arms around their parents. Anne looked at her Marines, tired but alive. Julia said that humanity had shown the galaxy something important, not just strength, but the will to protect those who ask for help, even when the cost is high. As the sun began to set behind the cliffs, Laura whispered that the galaxy had reached out to the wrong species, but maybe it was the right one after all. Daniel nodded. Anne smiled faintly. And the world below them, bruised and broken, felt the first soft touch of hope it had known in a long time.